My dad cut me off for refusing his religion. Now that I'm a millionaire, God wants us together. Please subscribe to this channel and please like, comment and share this video with your loved one. Let's dive in. Grab your popcorn and sit tight. Keisha Williams stood in the doorway of Mount Zion Baptist Church, watching her father, Pastor Jerome Williams, deliver his Sunday sermon with thunderous conviction. The congregation hung on his every word, but Keisha felt nothing but suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. At 19, she'd attended this church every Sunday for her entire life, but today would be different. Today would shatter everything.
The devil whispers lies to our children, Pastor Williams boomed, his dark eyes scanning the crowd.
He tells them they know better than God's word. He tells them they can live however they please without consequence. Keisha's hands trembled as she clutched her acceptance letter from Stanford University. Full scholarship.
Computer Science Major.
Her ticket out of the small Georgia town that felt more like a prison with each passing day. But there was a catch. Classes started in 2 weeks, and she'd have to miss Wednesday prayer meetings and Sunday services. After the service, she found her father in his office, still wearing his pastoral robes. The smell of old wood and church incense filled the cramped space lined with biblical commentaries and family photos. Jerome looked up from his sermon notes, his weathered face breaking into a proud smile.
Keisha, baby girl.
Did you hear that sermon? The Lord gave me such a powerful message today. Daddy, we need to talk. Her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay strong. She placed the Stanford letter on his desk. Jerome's eyes scanned the document, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to something darker. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the distant sound of church members chatting in the parking lot. This is God's test, he finally whispered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Jerome Williams had built his reputation on unwavering faith and biblical authority. As the son of a sharecropper who'd clawed his way to pastoral leadership, he viewed any deviation from God's path as spiritual rebellion. His own father had beaten scripture into him with leather straps and righteous fury. Now, staring at his daughter's college acceptance letter, those same rigid beliefs crystallized into an ultimatum that would destroy their family. Stanford University, he said, the words dripping with disdain. You want to abandon God's house for worldly education? You want to fill your head with secular poison that'll turn you against everything I've taught you? Keisha felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. Daddy, it's computer science. I can still be a Christian and get an education. I can help people with technology, maybe even help the church.
Don't you dare justify this rebellion with pretty words. Jerome's voice rose, echoing off the office walls.
I've seen what happens to young people who chase after worldly success. They forget their families, forget their faith, forget everything that matters. Behind Jerome hung a portrait of his own father, Samuel Williams, whose stern gaze seemed to bore into Keisha's soul. Samuel had founded Mount Zion in 1952 with nothing but faith and determination. 4 generations of Williams men had led this congregation, and Jerome had always assumed Keisha would marry a godly man and continue the family legacy. This scholarship is from God, Keisha pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Don't you see?
He's opening doors for me. Jerome stood slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the desk. God doesn't open doors that lead his children away from his house.
If you walk through those doors, Keisha, you walk alone.
You choose that school, you choose the world over your family. And I won't have my daughter living in sin and rebellion under my roof. The words hit Keisha like physical blows, each syllable carving deeper wounds into her heart. That night, Keisha packed her belongings into 2 suitcases while her mother, Diane Williams, wept quietly in the doorway. 30 years of marriage to Jerome had taught Diane the futility of challenging her husband's spiritual convictions, but watching their only child prepare to leave felt like witnessing her own death. Baby, maybe if you just waited a year, Diane whispered, her voice barely audible. Maybe took some classes at the community college instead. Your daddy just needs time to understand. Keisha folded her graduation dress, the same yellow sundress she'd worn when she was valedictorian of her high school class. Jerome had been so proud that day, telling everyone how God had blessed his daughter with intelligence. Now that same intelligence was tearing them apart. "Mama, I can't spend my whole life making myself smaller to fit into Daddy's version of God's plan." Keisha's hands shook as she zipped up her suitcase. "I've prayed about this every night for months."
I feel God calling me to something bigger than this town.
Downstairs, Jerome sat in his study, surrounded by theological books and family photos. His heart ached with a pain he'd never experienced, but his pride ran deeper than his love. In his mind, allowing Keisha to leave would be failing as a father and as a man of God. Better to lose her body than her soul. At midnight, Keisha loaded her belongings into her rusty Honda Civic. Diane slipped her an envelope containing $300, all the money she'd secretly saved from her church secretary salary. "This is all I have," she whispered, hugging her daughter one last time. As Keisha drove away, she watched her childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. Jerome stood silhouetted in the living room window, his figure rigid and unforgiving. Neither father nor daughter knew that this moment would haunt them both for the next 15 years, shaping every decision and every heartbreak that followed. Stanford University felt like landing on an alien planet. Keisha's dormmate, Jessica Chin, came from a wealthy Silicon Valley family and casually mentioned her father's latest startup acquisition over breakfast. While other freshmen worried about choosing the right sorority, Keisha worked 3 jobs just to afford textbooks and meals her scholarship didn't cover. Her work-study position in the computer lab introduced her to Professor Marcus Rodriguez, a former Google engineer who immediately recognized Keisha's raw programming talent. "You think differently than most students," he told her after she solved a complex algorithm problem in half the expected time. "You don't just write code, you see the poetry in it." Those words sustained Keisha through the loneliest nights of her life. While her classmates video called their families, she stared at her silent phone, wondering if her parents even remembered her birthday. She tried calling home twice, once during her first semester, once before Christmas. Both times, Jerome hung up the moment he heard her voice. By sophomore year, Keisha had thrown herself completely into her studies. She joined the Black Computer Science Student Association, where she met Jamal Thompson, a senior from Oakland whose own family had struggled to understand his academic ambitions. "Sometimes being the first means being the loneliest," he told her over late-night coding sessions. Their friendship gradually blossomed into romance, built on shared dreams of using technology to uplift their communities. Jamal introduced Keisha to venture capitalism through his internship connections, opening her eyes to the intersection of technology and business. For the first time since leaving home, Keisha began to envision a future beyond mere survival. But success came with its own burdens. Each academic achievement felt hollow without her parents' pride to share it with. Each coding breakthrough reminded her of her father's sermons about talents being gifts from God. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very intelligence Jerome had once celebrated now stood as the wall between them. During her junior year, Keisha discovered her calling in an unexpected place: the campus food bank. Watching international students struggle with food insecurity despite their academic brilliance sparked an idea that would change everything. What if technology could eliminate the inefficiencies in food distribution systems? Working 18-hour days in her dorm room, Keisha developed an algorithm that could predict food waste patterns and redirect surplus inventory to food banks in real time. Her prototype app, Feed Forward, connected restaurants, grocery stores, and food banks through predictive analytics and geolocation services. Professor Rodriguez was stunned by the elegance of her solution. "Keisha, this isn't just a class project. This could revolutionize how we think about food waste and hunger." He helped her apply for university research grants and connected her with Silicon Valley investors through Stanford's entrepreneurship program. The first investor meeting felt surreal. Keisha sat in a glass conference room overlooking San Francisco Bay, pitching her idea to 3 venture capitalists who collectively managed billions in assets. Her hands trembled as she clicked through her presentation slides, but her voice grew stronger with each data point. Food waste costs the U.S. economy $218 billion annually, she explained, her southern accent barely detectable after 3 years in California. Simultaneously, 1 in 8 Americans faces food insecurity. Feed Forward doesn't just solve a logistics problem, it addresses a moral crisis. The lead investor, Sarah Kim from Breakthrough Ventures, leaned forward with intense interest. What's your revenue model? How do you scale this beyond pilot programs? Keisha's response revealed the depth of her preparation. She'd researched every competitor, analyzed market trends, and developed a 5-year growth strategy that impressed even the most skeptical investors. By the meeting's end, she'd secured $2.3 million in seed funding. That night, she called her parents' house for the first time in 2 years. Diane answered, her voice catching with surprise and hope. But when Keisha tried to share her good news, Jerome took the phone and hung up without saying a word. Feed Forward launched 6 months later with partnerships across 12 major cities. The app's intuitive design and powerful analytics attracted attention from major food chains, while its social mission resonated with environmentally conscious consumers. Within a year, Keisha's company had diverted over 50 million pounds of food from landfills to families in need. The success attracted unexpected challenges. Competitors emerged with deeper pockets and established distribution networks. Marcus Sterling, CEO of FoodLink Technologies, attempted a hostile takeover by offering Keisha's early investors triple returns. Several board members pressured her to sell, arguing that she lacked the experience to compete against established players. "You're brilliant, Keisha," investor David Park told her during a tense board meeting. "But being brilliant isn't enough in this market." Sterling has relationships with every major grocery chain in America. Keisha refused to surrender her vision. Instead, she leveraged her company's social mission to build partnerships with community organizations, churches, and local governments that her corporate competitors couldn't access. Her intimate understanding of food insecurity, gained from her own struggles, became Feed Forward's greatest competitive advantage. The breakthrough came when New York City selected Feed Forward as the exclusive platform for its municipal food waste reduction initiative. The $47 million contract validated Keisha's approach and attracted additional funding from impact investors focused on social good. By age 25, Keisha Williams was worth $15 million on paper and featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of America's youngest black female CEOs. The article praised her innovative approach to solving hunger through technology, but Keisha's favorite line was the quote from a food bank director in Detroit. "Keisha didn't just build an app, she built hope." Yet despite her success, Keisha felt a profound emptiness. Every achievement felt incomplete without her family's acknowledgement. She kept a photo of her parents on her desk, a daily reminder of the love she'd sacrificed for her dreams. Keisha's success caught the attention of Titan Industries, a Fortune 500 conglomerate looking to acquire innovative tech companies. CEO Victoria Langston, a ruthless businesswoman who'd built her empire through strategic acquisitions, saw Feed Forward as the perfect addition to Titan's portfolio of social impact investments. The acquisition offer was staggering, $150 million, with Keisha retaining operational control and a guaranteed 10-year contract as CEO. The deal would make her one of the youngest black women to sell a company for 9 figures, but it came with strings attached that made Keisha uncomfortable. "We want to integrate Feed Forward with our existing logistics platforms," Langston explained during their meeting in Titan's Manhattan headquarters.
Think bigger, Keisha.
"Instead of just food waste, we tackle all waste streams, electronics, textiles, pharmaceutical returns. This could be a $1 trillion market." Keisha spent sleepless nights weighing the decision. The money would secure her financial future and provide resources to expand her social mission globally. But Titan's corporate culture felt soulless compared to the grassroots passion that had driven Feed Forward's early success. Her decision was made easier by an unexpected phone call from her college roommate, Jessica Chen, now a successful venture capitalist herself. "Don't let them change who you are," Jessica warned. "I've seen what happens when mission-driven entrepreneurs get swallowed by corporate giants. Your social impact becomes a marketing slogan." Instead of selling to Titan, Keisha chose a different path. She partnered with the Gates Foundation and other philanthropic organizations to expand Feed Forward internationally, starting with pilot programs in South Africa, Brazil, and Bangladesh. The partnership provided $75 million in funding while allowing Keisha to maintain her company's independence and social mission. The decision proved prescient when a data breach at Titan Industries 6 months later exposed the personal information of millions of customers. Keisha's refusal to sell protected Feed Forward's reputation and allowed the company to attract new partners who valued its ethical leadership. At 28, Keisha Williams had achieved everything she'd dreamed of and more. Feed Forward operated in 47 countries, had diverted over £2 billion of food waste, and generated annual revenues exceeding $200 million. Her personal net worth had grown to $85 million, placing her among the wealthiest self-made black women in America. Success brought opportunities she'd never imagined. The Obama Foundation invited her to speak at their inaugural summit. Harvard Business School recruited her as a guest lecturer. Time magazine included her in their annual list of the world's most influential people under 30. But fame also brought scrutiny. An investigative journalist named Rachel Morrison began researching Keisha's background for a profile piece, uncovering the story of her estrangement from her family. Morrison reached out to Mount Zion Baptist Church, speaking with congregants who remembered the bright young girl who'd vanished overnight. Keisha was special, recalled Mrs. Betty Johnson, the church pianist who'd known Keisha since childhood. That girl could recite entire chapters of scripture from memory. Pastor Williams was so proud of her. Whatever happened between them, it broke his heart. He's never been the same since she left. The revelation that Keisha's success had come at the cost of her family relationship added a tragic element to her inspiring rags to riches narrative. Morrison's article, titled The Price of Dreams, portrayed Keisha as a brilliant but lonely figure who'd achieved worldly success while losing her spiritual foundation. Reading the article felt like being punched in the stomach. Morrison had captured truths Keisha had spent years avoiding, that her drive for success was partly motivated by a desperate need to prove her worth to the father who'd rejected her, and that her philanthropic work was an attempt to fill the void left by her family's absence. The article's publication coincided with the 10th anniversary of Keisha leaving home. For the first time in years, she seriously considered returning to Georgia to attempt reconciliation with her parents. The flight from San Francisco to Atlanta felt longer than any international journey Keisha had taken for Feed Forward's global expansion. She'd booked the trip impulsively after reading Morrison's article, driven by a sudden urgency to repair the relationship with her parents before it was too late. Driving through her hometown, Keisha was struck by how little had changed. The same gas stations, the same fast food restaurants, the same sense of economic stagnation that had motivated her escape 15 years earlier. Mount Zion Baptist Church looked smaller than she remembered, its paint faded and parking lot cracked. She parked across the street and watched congregants file in for Wednesday evening service. Many faces were familiar, neighbors who'd watched her grow up, church members who'd celebrated her high school achievements. But she also noticed how much older everyone looked, how the congregation seemed smaller and grayer than in her memories. Pastor Jerome Williams emerged from the church office, and Keisha's breath caught in her throat. Her father had aged dramatically, his once powerful frame now stooped and frail. His hair was completely gray, and he moved with the careful steps of someone battling chronic pain. Keisha almost turned around and drove back to the airport. The man she'd been trying to prove herself to for 15 years looked nothing like the towering figure of her memories. But as she watched him greet elderly parishioners with gentle kindness, she remembered why she'd loved him so deeply before their relationship shattered. During the service, Keisha slipped into the back pew, hidden behind Mrs. Williams, who was too absorbed in Jerome's sermon to notice the familiar figure behind her. Jerome's preaching style had mellowed with age, less fire and brimstone, more wisdom and compassion. Sometimes we make mistakes in the name of righteousness, he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes we hold so tightly to our beliefs that we forget the greatest commandment is to love. The words felt directed at her, though Jerome hadn't yet noticed her presence. After the service, Keisha waited until the church had emptied before approaching her father. Jerome Williams looked up from organizing his sermon notes and froze. For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other across 15 years of silence and hurt. Keisha had imagined this moment countless times, but reality felt nothing like her rehearsed scenarios.
Hello, Daddy.
Her voice cracked like it had when she was 19 and desperately seeking his approval. Jerome's hand trembled as he set down his papers. The successful, confident CEO who'd addressed world leaders and billion-dollar investors was gone, replaced by the vulnerable young woman who'd left home with nothing but dreams and determination.
Keisha.
He spoke her name like a prayer, like he'd been holding it in his heart for years, afraid to say it aloud.
You come back.
I read an article about myself, about us, about what happened. She stepped closer, noting how the office looked exactly the same. Same books, same family photos, though she noticed several new pictures of church events where her absence was conspicuous. Jerome sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. I read it too. Mrs. Johnson brought me a copy from the library. Said I needed to see what my stubbornness had cost us both. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Keisha had prepared for anger, defensiveness, or religious lectures. She hadn't prepared for her father's vulnerability. I was wrong, Jerome continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I was so afraid of losing you to the world that I pushed you away myself. I thought I was protecting your soul, but I was really protecting my own pride. Keisha felt 15 years of carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble.
Daddy, I never stopped loving you.
Even when I was angry, even when I succeeded despite your predictions, I just wanted you to be proud of me. Jerome looked up at his daughter, this accomplished woman who'd built an empire from nothing, and saw the little girl who used to sit on his lap during sermon preparation, asking endless questions about God and life and love. I've been proud of you every single day, he whispered, even when I was too stubborn to admit it. Diane Williams had been grocery shopping when she received Jerome's frantic phone call. She's here, he said, his voice shaking with emotion.
Our baby come home.
Rushing to the church, Diane found her husband and daughter sitting together in Jerome's office, both crying and talking simultaneously, 15 years of separation spilling out in a torrent of words and tears. She stood in the doorway, afraid to interrupt the miracle she'd prayed for every night since Keisha left.
Mama.
Keisha looked up, and Diane saw not the successful businesswoman from magazine covers, but her baby girl who used to crawl into bed during thunderstorms. The three-way embrace that followed felt like resurrection. They held each other as if physical touch could heal the years of emotional distance, as if love alone could bridge the chasm that pride and fear had created. I kept every article, Diane confessed through her tears.
Every magazine cover, every news story. I have a whole scrapbook hidden in my closet.
I was so proud, but your father forbade me from talking about it.
Jerome's confession came harder. I was afraid, Keisha.
Afraid that if I acknowledged your success, I'd be admitting I was wrong to let you go. My pride was more important to me than my daughter, and that's a sin I'll carry for the rest of my life. They talked until midnight, sharing 15 years of missed milestones. Keisha learned about Jerome's diabetes diagnosis, about the church's financial struggles, about Diane's depression during the years after Keisha left. Her parents learned about Keisha's loneliness, about the time she'd achieved major successes and had no family to call, about the relationships that had failed because she couldn't fully trust anyone after her father's rejection. I want to make this right, Jerome said as the evening wound down. I don't know how, but I want to try. Keisha nodded, exhausted but hopeful for the first time in years. We'll figure it out together. We have time now. But even as they spoke of reconciliation and healing, none of them knew that Jerome's recent health problems were more serious than he'd admitted, and that time might be the one thing they didn't have. 2 weeks after their emotional reunion, Jerome collapsed during Sunday morning service. The paramedics who responded found his blood pressure dangerously elevated and his heartbeat irregular. At the hospital, Dr. Patricia Hayes delivered news that shattered the Williams family's fragile new beginning. The tests show advanced heart disease, Dr. Hayes explained to Keisha and Diane in the sterile consultation room. Pastor Williams has been living with this condition for at least 2 years, probably longer. The stress and high blood pressure have damaged his heart significantly. Keisha felt the world tilt on its axis. She'd just gotten her father back, and now she faced the possibility of losing him forever. What are the treatment options? She asked, her business training kicking in as she sought concrete information to combat the overwhelming emotion. Surgery is possible, but risky given his age and the extent of the damage. There's a new procedure available at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, a specialized cardiac intervention that's showing promising results for patients with Pastor Williams' condition. But it's expensive, and insurance typically doesn't cover experimental treatments. The cost was $350,000, more money than Jerome and Diane could imagine, but pocket change for someone with Keisha's resources. She immediately authorized the treatment, but Jerome initially refused. "I can't let you spend your money on me," he protested from his hospital bed. "I gave up the right to your help when I turned my back on you." "Daddy, you didn't give up anything," Keisha replied firmly, taking his weathered hand in hers. "Family doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way." The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Jerome's shame about their estrangement. He'd spent 15 years believing that accepting help from Keisha would validate her choice to leave, but her success without his blessing had already proven her right. "Maybe this is God's way of bringing us back together," Diane suggested quietly. "Maybe he knew you were both too stubborn to reconcile without something big forcing your hands." As Jerome was prepped for surgery, Keisha realized that all her wealth and success meant nothing if she couldn't save the man who'd shaped her life, even through his absence. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Keisha paced the waiting room like a caged animal, her usual composure shattered by the possibility of losing her father just weeks after finding him again. She'd faced hostile takeover attempts, congressional testimony, and high-stakes investor meetings with unshakable confidence, but waiting for news about Jerome's heart surgery reduced her to the frightened child she'd once been. Dr. Michael Chen, the cardiac surgeon who'd performed the procedure, emerged looking exhausted but satisfied. "The surgery was successful," he announced to the small group of family and church members who'd maintained a prayer vigil. "Pastor Williams has a strong heart and an even stronger will to live. He should make a full recovery." The relief was overwhelming. Keisha sank into a chair and wept openly, 15 years of suppressed emotion pouring out in the sterile hospital waiting room. Church members who'd known her since childhood gathered around, praying and celebrating the double miracle of Jerome's survival and the family's reconciliation. During Jerome's recovery, something beautiful happened. Keisha worked remotely from her parents' house, managing Feedforward's global operations from the same kitchen table where she'd once done homework. Jerome watched his daughter work with a mixture of pride and amazement, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd built. "You know what impresses me most," he told her one afternoon as she finished a video call with Feedforward's London office. "It's not the money or the success.
It's that you never forgot where you come from.
You're using your gifts to feed people, just like Jesus did." The recognition she'd craved for 15 years finally came, but it felt different now. Less desperate, more peaceful. They'd both changed, humbled by loss and time and the realization that love was more important than being right. On the day Jerome was cleared to return to preaching, he asked Keisha to introduce him to the congregation. Standing at the pulpit where she'd once felt suffocated, Keisha looked out at the faces that had shaped her childhood and realized she was finally, truly home. Sometimes God's plan requires us to go far away so we can appreciate what we had all along, she told the congregation. Sometimes the very thing that breaks us apart is what brings us back together, stronger than before. The service ended with father and daughter embracing at the altar, surrounded by a community that had prayed for this moment for 15 years. In that embrace was forgiveness, redemption, and the promise of time, however much they had left, spent together as a family healed. Thanks for listening to the amazing story we put together for you. Was this story worth your time? Drop your thoughts in the comment. And don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next upload.